In a move that absolutely no one wanted to see, yet still manages to be somewhat unsurprising, Daisy Ridley is set to reprise her role as Rey in one of 3 Star Wars movies newly announced. And even at these earliest of stages of development, there are already some telltale worrying signs emerging as to what we'll be in for with this new film, and the Star Wars franchise as a whole in the coming years, and possibly for the remainder of its life cycle. Let's see what's going on then. So, this next sequel film was being written by Damon Lindelof. Lindelof himself is a self-proclaimed nerd, and just the sort of person you'd want working on the project. But shortly after handing in the script for the film, he quit, stating, "If it can't be great, it shouldn't exist. I think it's possible that sometimes when you hold something in such high reverence and esteem, you start to get in the kitchen and you just go, maybe I shouldn't be cooking, maybe I should just be eating. We'll just leave it at that point. If it can't be great, it shouldn't exist." A philosophy diametrically opposite to that of Disney, something that will soon become abundantly clear. Though in lieu of Lindelof and his co-writer Justin Britt Gibson, Peaky Blinders creator Stephen Knight is taking over the writing. So expect to see scenes of Rey and some young Jedi apprentice hopefuls walking purposefully down the streets of Tatooine in an obnoxious abreast formation taking up the full width of the street, until reaching their destination of the Mos Eisley Cantina, where Rey gets in a brawl with some Mandalorians before downing a shot of whiskey and lighting a cigarette with her lightsaber.
It was such an individual way of lighting a cigarette.
Anyway, in the directing role of this new mainline film is Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, who is known for creating documentaries as part of her efforts as an activist that highlight the struggles women go through in Pakistani and Muslim culture. Her most notable films are Saving Face, a 2012 documentary of the acid attacks on women in Pakistan, A Girl in the River, The Price of Forgiveness, which also is a film about a Pakistani girl who survives an honor killing from her father and uncle. Now, I haven't seen these documentaries, and they are critically acclaimed, and I'm sure they bring to light some of the troubles women go through. Similar stories have been in the news in recent years. Very horrifying, of course. But these are documentaries with a very particular focus. She also directed some episodes of Miss Marvel, which was one of the lower budget Marvel TV shows and just as much a teen drama as it was a superhero series, in which Pakistani and Muslim culture also play a significant role. And I don't see anything wrong with working culture into the MCU. It can in fact add something refreshing as long as it is done in the right way. But this is Star Wars, it's sci-fi, the Force, Jedi, one of the premier movie franchises in the world. This is big budget stuff. So these credentials don't exactly inspire a whole lot of confidence when it comes to asking for things like magnificent action sequences and intense lightsaber duels. So the question to ask yourself is this: did Sharmeen get the job because she's a seasoned director and or passionate about Star Wars, wanting to pay homage to its legacy by producing a film the fandom will love? Or did she get the job because she's an activist, and apparently being an activist makes you the most qualified person for every job these days? Come to whatever conclusions you will. Given this information of Sharmeen being involved in female-centric projects, we can speculate that Rey will remain very much at the center stage. And as the last set of films established her character as very powerful, this next movie in the sequence may look to make a point of her wisdom. The film is in fact set 15 years after the rise of Skywalker and tells the story of Rey rebuilding the Jedi Order, so we might see her depicted as a wise Jedi master figure guiding young Padawans on their path. But there is a problem with that. We already know Rey is strong, especially now since 15 years have passed since the rise of Skywalker, so it would not make for a compelling story for her to maintain her place in the leading role. She should be as a major supporting role instead. It's the same reason that Yoda, Gandalf and Dumbledore are all major supporting characters, but not the leads of their respective films. But maybe this 15-year time jump was intentional to help push Rey into the background given how poorly the character was received by fans. So let's remind ourselves of why that was, starting with just what was sacrificed to make this character rise to the forefront of the series and become the new hero. Luke was sacrificed. He was no longer a beacon of hope, not even a vestige of what he once was, but a recluse, living in regret of his failure to restore the Jedi Order. Leia failed as Chief of State in the New Republic because the remnants of the Empire still remained and managed to re-establish power. And of course, Darth Vader did not defeat Palpatine. And it takes a certain ego, a certain narcissism and entitlement, or just being consumed by a power trip to want to undo the established legacies of your predecessors. It's like the kind of person who sees a nice happy snowman on someone's front lawn and kicks it down. And in the wake of this devastation and sacrifice to create a clean slate to build on, what did we get? At its core, it was a recycled version of the original films, but with more of a cliche hero just beats villain story and some searching for artifacts here and there along the way. It's a message to the audience that, you know how in the last Star Wars movies, Luke and Anakin defeat Palpatine? Well, that didn't actually happen anymore. Here's Rey. Rey's great. She's bigger and better than the heroes you've seen in the past, and she's going to beat Palpatine now instead. And she's barely going to break a sweat beating others along the way too, because she's that cool. And indeed, this was much of George Lucas's criticism himself, stating, "There's nothing new," in his initial reaction to an early cut of The Force Awakens. There were also efforts to create doubt and suspense by convincing the audience that Rey may succumb to the allure of the dark side, which was utterly futile. Not least because there wasn't really any established motive there in the first place like there was with Anakin. And also it has to be said that in this day and age, social political undercurrents have been swaying these stories in certain directions, certain dull, predictable directions that insist on portraying certain people in certain ways. To put it explicitly, a main female character be corrupted by the dark side? Impossible. Female characters are pure-hearted, innocent creatures, and incorruptible. And because she's better than others, she could do what Anakin couldn't. And the cherry on top of it all is that Rey is in fact the granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine. And so it's a culmination of all these reasons that the character leaves a bitter taste in the mouths of fans. A bitter taste that Disney won't let you wash out because she's making a return. And even if this next installment of productions are good, what does it matter? A precedent has been set that major plot points can be retconned, characters can be undermined and sent back to square one, and any liberty can be taken in general. Ultimately, the entire viewing experience has become redundant. There are no rules. It does what it wants, whatever will look most spectacular and make the most money. An inconsequential world may seem fun at first, but very quickly becomes a dull, meaningless one. Just do what you want now and call it canon. Like, for example, this.
You are Balenciaga, Luke.
You know, Disney, why not, eh? Pick up a nice little bit of product placement revenue while you're at it. And when the lore of Star Wars is turned into a mockery, no one takes it seriously anymore. The sentiment becomes one of apathy, and the character Rey is just seen as the figurehead of a tarnished legacy. And this is why much of the other cast members have since distanced themselves from the franchise, so as not to be associated with such connotations. And that's rather saddening, because I think Daisy Ridley is a decent enough actress who can seamlessly fit into the Star Wars universe. And I'd even go as far as to say, at the risk of having a rather unpopular opinion, that had she actually been handed a decent enough script and the movies were written with some degree of competence, she could do a good enough job at being the new face of the franchise. But instead of fresh, well-written stories, Rey was just made to be the one taking over the mantle as the new face of the series. And how do you solidify her position as worthy leader in the minds of Disney? Have her take down not just any bad guy, but the big bad, Emperor Palpatine himself. But these efforts were, of course, rather magnificent failures. And by combining recycled stories with fresh new faces, you can bring in mainstream appeal at the box office. And once the visual spectacle, nostalgia trips, and cheap parlor tricks have you suckered in, you can help Disney win the real war going on behind the scenes. The streaming war, that is, by being invested enough in the franchise to purchase a Disney Plus subscription. And they will always have something on the go, so you don't ever have to worry about cancelling your subscription. We have The Mandalorian, which was a flagship show of the new era of Star Wars, but Season 3 recently opened to worse viewing numbers than The Book of Boba Fett, as the lack of success of Book of Boba Fett managed to stunt much of the dwindling interest in The Mandalorian too, and the novelty of Baby Yoda had largely worn off in general. This comes as one of many productions Disney have in the works, many of which have already been cancelled, including a trilogy of films by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, another trilogy by Rian Johnson, and Rogue Squadron, to name just a few. But some are continuing in the hopes that at least something will succeed, including 2 other films announced alongside the next main sequel film. And in theory, why not? Star Wars is after all an entire galaxy worth of stories waiting to happen. Much of the appeal of The Mandalorian was simply its episodic way of exploring the galaxy, turning over rocks and finding out what's underneath. For writers, that's a limitless sandbox of potential to manifest whatever storyline they please, so there's really no excuse to fail. But despite having such potential to create something new, they've resurrected dead characters by making physical reappearances, or failing that, using eerie CGI renditions of them to play on nostalgia. And instead of a galaxy full of potential for limitless creativity, it's clear Disney see the expansive Star Wars universe as a galaxy full of cash that can never run dry. In fact, I'm willing to bet that words to that effect have been uttered by some smug exec at Disney when deciding whether or not to make the acquisition of Lucasfilm. If they don't find value in one place with one production, they may yet find it in another. And all these opportunities mean they can rush productions because what doesn't work can be thrown out and replaced with something else instead, such that deadlines can be met and a consistent cash flow be made, leaving you never wanting to cancel your subscription. And it was this fast fashion, disposable approach which constituted a major reason the new movies were so poor and incohesive, because the writing of the new trilogy was split between J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, such that Disney's deadlines could be met. And this all means the entire filmmaking process has just been compromised. Star Wars was a sensation that redefined what a sci-fi film could be. It soared to the forefront of popular consciousness and conquered the zeitgeist of its era. It was a groundbreaking combination of sci-fi interwoven with mystical fantasy. It was imaginative, adventuresome, inspired, and it won the hearts of fans across the world. And to Disney, that makes fans naively sentimental targets who will consume whatever they're given because those with nostalgic attachment are easy to prey on. Their business is largely guaranteed. And that's where we're at with Star Wars now. It's a mature cash cow that Disney are determined to milk until it runs totally dry and loses all its dignity. This is essentially how many business cycles go. All the work is put in to make the thing great, then once it reaches maturity, it's plundered for all it's worth, stripped of its assets, and sold off as scrap. And the extensive list of productions being rushed out is indicative of exactly this. Sure, they may produce good shows and movies here and there along the way. The newly announced Jedi origin story set 25,000 years in the past, being produced by James Mangold, actually sounds interesting. But when you see where the entire process is inevitably going, it just kind of ruins it all. And that's really what I see these days when I look at many, but not all, of these once prestigious IPs. This isn't something exclusive to Star Wars or even Disney. All that's needed is a flashy exterior to wow fans so they don't see the ugly underbelly of a once beloved franchise that is being sapped of everything that made it so great. Think of it like the rags to riches story of the individual born into poverty who dared to dream and attained to greatness, but then later had a child who was born into the privilege and became a spoilt brat who felt entitled to all the riches of the world without wanting to work for it. When you open a book, most of the time you know it was written from a place of purity, creativity, inspiration. The author put their heart and soul into making it, oftentimes regardless of what reception it would receive. It was simply done out of enjoyment for the endeavour itself. And naturally, the same sentiment resides in many of those in the TV and film industry too, including, of course, those involved in the making of the Star Wars films of old. But when the entire creative process is being run by greedy executives trying to meet deadlines to make a quick buck, entitled wannabes sitting in boardrooms making charts, and now activists too, you're just going to get a devilish concoction of terribleness, where expecting any kind of good end result becomes something of a pipe dream. And because these once great franchises are so often, but not always, compromised, the lesson to be learnt is perhaps that good things don't always come from the places we are most inclined to set our gaze upon. Ultimately, it's down to the fans to make the distinction of what really embodies the thing we enjoyed, and what is pseudo. Just because a company has sufficient money to buy the name, doesn't mean they possess even one iota of the spirit. Trends come and go in general. Tastes change. Franchises naturally erode to a certain degree as time passes. But Disney and much of Hollywood are set on depriving them of every shred of dignity they have, and plundering them until every fandom becomes apathetic towards the very thing that was once held dear to their hearts. Disney are ruining Star Wars, and they don't care. Maybe once this franchise has been looted for all it's worth and not valued so highly, it'll be sold off for a bargain price by some plucky upstart studio, and a new hope will arise where we least expect it.